Welcome to the Pardes channel. Today we explain Genesis chapter 16 in a clear and simple way, step by step. We are going to explore a profoundly human drama found right here in the text. Honestly, it's a story about unfulfilled promises, the desperate actions people take when they just get so tired of waiting, and the incredible, totally unforeseen consequences of those actions. We're going to look really closely at Abram, Sarai, and an Egyptian maidservant named Hagar. It's a narrative that is absolutely filled to the brim with tension, anxiety, and ultimately a stunning moment of divine intervention.
Okay, let's dive into this. What happens when human plans collide with divine promises? This question right here is the absolute core of Genesis chapter 16. You see, God has made this massive, life-altering promise to Abram that he is going to have countless descendants. But, well, time is marching on. The biological clock isn't just ticking. For them, it seems to have stopped completely. So what do you do when God's timeline doesn't match your timeline? Do you wait patiently, or do you take matters into your own hands to force the outcome? This chapter gives us a front-row seat to the clash between human anxiety and divine timelines. And the fallout from this clash, it's something that still resonates thousands of years later.
Here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with number 1, the promise and the problem. Then, 2, Sarai's plan and Hagar. 3, the conflict in the household. 4, Hagar flees the camp. 5, the angel in the desert. And finally, number 6, the birth of Ishmael.
Section 1, the promise and the problem. Let's set the stage.
To truly understand the drastic actions taken in this chapter, we really have to wrap our heads around the intense tension that has been building up in Abram's camp over a very long period of time. Verse 3 tells us exactly where we are in the timeline. It's after Abram had been living in Canaan for 10 years. Now just pause and think about what a decade of waiting actually feels like. 10 years. In the previous chapter, we saw God make a covenant with Abram, promising him an heir that would come from his own body and descendants as numerous as the stars. It sounded amazing, but a whole decade has passed since they arrived in Canaan. That's 10 long years of hoping, waiting, and honestly, facing disappointment month after month. Notice that Abram is approaching 86 years old, and Sarai, she is entirely barren. The reality of their advanced age is a heavy daily burden that they just can't shake. The promise feels incredibly distant, and the problem of their childlessness is reaching an absolute boiling point.
Moving right along to Section 2, Sarai's plan and Hagar, the human solution.
When the divine solution seems delayed, well, human beings naturally look for a human solution. It's just what we do. Here, we see Sarai stepping forward with a desperate, highly proactive plan to build her family. So the crucial point is right here, in verse 2, where Sarai says, "The Lord has kept me from having children." Notice her theological view here. She firmly believes that God is the one actively preventing her pregnancy. And because she feels God has completely closed the door for her biologically, she proposes a workaround. "Go sleep with my maidservant. Perhaps I can build a family through her." Now, to fully grasp this without judging her through a modern lens, we need to understand that in the ancient world, offering a maidservant as a surrogate was a recognized social and legal practice. It wasn't scandalous in their culture. Rather, it was a desperate mechanism to ensure a family lineage survived. The child born to the maidservant would legally be considered Sarai's child. So Sarai is taking control, trying to literally force God's promise to come true through her own strategic planning. The maidservant she chooses for this? It's Hagar, an Egyptian woman who works in Sarai's service.
Verse 2 concludes very simply, almost shockingly so. Abram agreed to what Sarai said. And then verse 3 confirms that Sarai took Hagar and gave her to Abram to be his wife. It is fascinating how the text presents this moment. Abram doesn't argue. He doesn't seek God's counsel on the matter. He doesn't say, hey, maybe we should wait a bit longer. He simply assents to his wife's plan. He is entirely passive in this massive life decision. As a result, Hagar's status in the household is suddenly dramatically elevated. She goes from being simply an Egyptian maidservant to being given to Abram as a wife, specifically for the purpose of bearing a child. As you can imagine, this shifts the entire social dynamic of the camp in an instant. Everything is about to change.
Which brings us to Section 3, Conflict in the Household, the Unintended Consequences.
Whenever we try to force a human solution onto a complex problem, there are almost always unintended consequences, right? Here, the plan works biologically, but it fails spectacularly sociologically. Verse 4 tells us that Abram slept with Hagar and she conceived, but the very moment Hagar knows she is pregnant, the text says she began to despise her mistress. Now remember, in that ancient culture, a woman's value was heavily tied to her ability to bear children. Hagar suddenly possesses the one thing Sarai lacks, the one thing Sarai desperately wants, and she lets Sarai know it. The entire power dynamic flips upside down. Sarai is absolutely furious. She goes straight to Abram and says, "You are responsible for the wrong I am suffering." She even goes so far as to invoke God, saying, "May the Lord judge between you and me." She squarely blames Abram for allowing this insubordination to happen under his roof. Now Abram's response in verse 6, it's completely hands-off. "Your servant is in your hands," he says. "Do with her whatever you think best." Think about that. Abram essentially abdicates all responsibility. He refuses to step in and mediate the conflict between his wives, choosing instead to step back entirely and just let Sarai handle it however she sees fit.
So, given what is essentially a blank check by Abram, the second half of verse 6 tells us exactly what Sarai does. Then Sarai ill-treated Hagar, so she fled from her. The original Hebrew here heavily implies harsh, oppressive treatment. We're not just talking about a cold shoulder. The situation becomes so incredibly toxic, so unbearable for Hagar, that this pregnant woman decides her chances are actually better out in the deadly, harsh wilderness than staying safely in Abram's camp. That's how bad it got. She runs away, she is marginalized, she's mistreated, and now she is entirely alone in the harsh desert.
Section 4. Hagar flees the camp. Now we are completely alone in the wilderness.
At this point, the narrative completely shifts its camera away from Abram and Sarai. The focus zeroes right in on the desert and on the desperate plight of this runaway pregnant servant. What is profoundly moving here is how God initiates contact. Verse 7 tells us that the angel of the Lord found Hagar near a spring in the desert. It was the spring that is beside the road to shore. She's actually on the road heading back towards Egypt, her homeland. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the way the angel addresses her. He asks this deeply searching question. "Hagar, servant of Sarai, where have you come from and where are you going?" Notice a couple of things here. First, the angel calls her by her actual name. She isn't just anonymous property anymore. But he also gently reminds her of her current legal reality by saying servant of Sarai. Hagar answers him honestly, laying it all out. "I'm running away from my mistress Sarai." She knows exactly what she is running from, but she honestly has no real idea where she is going or how she is going to survive.
Section 5. The Angel in the Desert. The Moment of Divine Intervention.
Out here in the absolute middle of nowhere, in the desolate wilderness, Hagar receives a divine intervention that quite literally changes the course of history. Let's walk through the specific details of the angel's intense, multi-part message to Hagar, starting in verse 9. First up comes a very difficult, very direct command. Go back to your mistress and submit to her. Wow. The angel is telling her to return to the incredibly difficult, toxic situation she just fled from. But he doesn't just send her back empty-handed to suffer. He gives her a massive, sweeping prophecy. He promises, "I will so increase your descendants that they will be too numerous to count." Does that sound familiar? It is incredibly similar to the massive promise God gave to Abram. Then, the angel tells her she will have a son, and he gives her highly specific details about this boy's future. He says, "He will be a wild donkey of a man." Now, I know to our modern ears calling someone a wild donkey might sound like an insult or a joke, but in the ancient Near East, the wild donkey was a majestic creature that symbolized absolute, untamed freedom. It lived out in the open wilderness, refusing to carry burdens or be enslaved by anyone. The angel is promising Hagar a servant, that her son will never ever be a servant. He will be free, fiercely independent, and strong. The prophecy concludes by saying his hand will be against everyone, and he will live in hostility toward all his brothers, meaning he will fiercely guard his independence and his boundaries against anyone who tries to tame him.
Moving to verse 11, the angel gives the unborn boy a name, Ishmael. The text explicitly tells us the meaning of this name. It means God hears, or the Lord has heard of your misery. Let's just think about what a profound comfort this must have been to Hagar. In her lowest, most desperate moment, crying out all alone in the desert, the creator of the universe actually tuned in to the frequency of her suffering. God literally heard her misery, and the very name of her son would be a permanent living monument to that incredible fact.
And this brilliantly illustrates the complete transformation that happens within Hagar. In verse 13, she actually gives a name to the Lord who spoke to her. She calls him El Rai, which translates to, "You are the God who sees me." She marvels at this, saying, "I have now seen the one who sees me." Think about the weight of this for a second. Hagar is a foreigner, she is a servant, she's a runaway, she is a woman treated terribly by her masters. Yet, she is the one who gives a name to God in the biblical text. She realizes in this deeply personal moment that she is not invisible. Even out in the vast, completely empty desert, God saw her perfectly.
Because of this incredible encounter,
The physical location is permanently memorialized. Verse 14 tells us that the well where she was resting was named Bir Lahai Roy, meaning the well of the living one who sees me. The text notes that this well is located between Kadesh and Bered. It literally becomes a geographic landmark of God's profound compassion for the marginalized.
Section 6. The birth of Ishmael, bringing the narrative full circle.
Armed with this incredible divine promise and this deep personal encounter with God, Hagar obeys the angel, she makes the hard trek back and returns to Abram's camp, and the chapter concludes by bringing the narrative totally full circle. Verse 15 tells us plainly, "So Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram gave the name Ishmael to the son she had born." He uses the exact name the angel commanded. And then, verse 16 gives us the final anchor for our timeline. The text says, Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore him Ishmael. Remember earlier? 10 years had passed since he arrived in Canaan at age 75, a full decade of agonizing waiting, a desperate and messy human plan, a household completely torn apart, a dramatic flight out into the deadly desert, and a miraculous life-saving intervention have all culminated in this exact year. Abram is 86, and he finally has a son. Let's move to and see how this builds into the core, practical lessons of this chapter. We can pull out 3 major takeaways from the plain text for our own lives today. Step 1 is patience. This whole chapter is a masterclass in the sheer, agonizing difficulty of waiting. When we have a promise or a deep desire, waiting for the right time is incredibly hard. The temptation to force a human solution, just like Sarai did, is so powerful. But as we saw, forcing it rarely works out the way we hope. Step 2 is consequences. Every single action has a ripple effect. Sarai's plan created intense jealousy, Abram's passivity allowed cruelty to flourish, and Hagar's pride caused strife. Taking matters into our own hands without seeking divine guidance often deeply fractures our most important relationships. Finally, step 3 is compassion. Honestly, this is the most beautiful part of the chapter. God isn't just the God of the wealthy, powerful patriarchs like Abram. He is El Roi. He is the God who sees the runaway servant crying by a well. He hears and he sees those who are distressed, marginalized, and pushed out into the wilderness.
As we wrap up our detailed look at Genesis 16, I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought based on Hagar's incredible experience. When you find yourself in the wilderness, whether that is a literal tough situation, a deeply broken relationship, or just a really long season of waiting, will you recognize the God who sees you? Hagar's story assures us that no matter how isolated we feel, we are never invisible. Thank you for learning with us. If this helped you understand the chapter better, like, subscribe, and join us for the next chapter.